All I wanna say is that they don't really care about us. All I wanna say is that they don't really care about. All I wanna say is that they don't really care about. All I wanna say is that they don't really care about us. Your boy Michael Jackson had a point. You know, that's a song from, I think that came out like in the 90s. And Michael is in a jail and he dancing on the table. But the point of the song is they don't care about us. And that brings to my topic of, are they trying to kill us? Like, that's my topic for today. Are they trying to get rid of the black race? And what made me do this topic is, you know, I'm 35 and a lot has happened to the black community. And I'm not even talking about slavery and police brutality. That's inevitable, unfortunately. But there's other things that have happened in our community that caused a lot of deaths. Not to mention black on black crime. But black on black crime happened because of poverty. I don't even need to look up the stats for that. If you live in the inner city of Brooklyn, if you live in East New York, Brownsville, Bedford-Stuyvesant, Crown Heights, South Jamaica, any part of Queens of African Americans, we have a huge problem with black on black crime. So, and a lot of people say, you know, how could you talk about police brutality when we kill each other? The only reason why somebody would choose to do that is because of poverty. Most of the people that are in gangs come from impoverished, and when I say impoverished, I'm talking about parents that's not working, absent fathers, grandfathers, and uncles, because lack of male presence in a family, how you gonna survive? Now, some people, they do well, but there has to be some type of structure, right? Anybody that's any type of successful in their life, you've had at least one adult in your family that has structure. You had at least one adult that had to be sober. But if the adults in your life are not sober, if the adults in your life are in crime and in jail, how can they teach you anything? It's impossible. I am where I am today because of my father, period. He put me in the schools, private schools. He put me in the best schools. Did he help me get through college? No. But I had the skills to put myself through college, right? So if someone doesn't have at least one person in their life, it don't have to be necessarily the father, but the uncle, the grandfather, the somebody to show them love and stability, whether it be, some people are raised by their grandmother, and I'm gonna get into that. Yes, so black on black crime, I don't even have to get into that, but you already know most people that's in gangs, they come from poverty. They get into the gangs because lack of structure at home. You know, sometimes people could have two parents at home, but if their parents are not focused, if they don't got their mind right, what could they teach the children? And that's how it goes. So the first one, I want to talk about three things today: HIV, crack era, and COVID-19. Yes, COVID-19. COVID-19 was very devastating, and I wanted to spread some knowledge about it. Some of you may already know, but this topic I felt like is a very important topic, and this will wrap up my Black History series. Comment, like, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. I know a couple of people enjoyed the Nika Giovanni and the James Baldwin. But comment, like, and subscribe. I like positive feedback. Which topic was your favorite? And I plan on going in with the women's history. You know, I'm gonna really go in with that. But comment, like, and subscribe. Let me know what y'all want to hear. So the first one is HIV. Now, HIV is devastating because all of us know at least one person who has HIV. Me personally, on my mother's side of the family, there was a cousin who passed away before I was born. And people were very mean to him because back then it was a very ignorant time. It was associated with being gay. So yes, he was gay. And my mother's side of the family are very strange people. They're very religious, and so instead of embracing him with love, they actually came to the hospital and was like very derogatory to him. And it's sad because the way it was explained to me is that he probably died in his sin and rejected Jesus because of them. And since today is Sunday, I just wanted to say that a little bit. The topics that I'm talking about is very sensitive, and if you know somebody who's HIV positive, please don't treat them mean, because at the end of the day, any one of us could have HIV. Okay, HIV is not a gay disease. I can't stress that enough. Though a lot of gay people may have it, it is not a gay disease. Anybody could catch it at any time. If you are sexually active, you could catch it. Your husband, you have some people that's born with it and they don't tell their spouse. So you think that you're perfect because you kept yourself until marriage. Guess what? Your husband could have been born with it, not tell you, and boom, you got it. Or he could cheat on you and you catch it. So don't ever think that you cannot catch HIV. I remember a previous boyfriend of mine, he said that people who have STDs are whores. And I'm just listening to him like, interesting. Like, you have to understand, when people have sex, they could catch something and it could be dormant. Not all STDs have symptoms, such as something called HPV, right? They tell the children to get the vaccine early to prevent HPV. There's no symptoms for HPV, for example, right? And in some cases, there's no symptoms for HIV, depending on the person's immune system. Now, oftentimes there is the person, I know a classmate of mine from high school, I kind of figured he had HIV because he was in North Carolina summertime and he caught a fever. And so he found out he had HIV. And it was really sad because he was really young, like 19, and caught it. And I don't know if he's still alive. I'm not in communication with him. But that's just an example of someone that I knew personally who caught HIV. And it's sad. I wouldn't want that for anybody. Anybody could catch it. It's not a gay disease. And I'm going to read some stats. HIV affects the black community the most, right? So we are the minority group, but for some reason, we are always affected by everything the most. And so that's why the question arises, are they really trying to get rid of us? Some of us, may say, oh, well, you got to protect yourself, you got to do this. But sometimes you could do all of that and still catch these things, So it says HIV affects the black community the most, according to the Centers for Disease Control, which is the CDC. Black Americans represent 43% of HIV each year. A black American represents 43% of new HIV diagnoses each year. That's a very high percentage for a minority group. And black people are 3 times more likely to die from HIV than any other race or ethnic group. So if that's not a setup, I don't know what is. Why are we 3 times more likely to die from HIV? Aren't we the same? Don't we have the same body? Don't we have and so then I looked up why, right? It says systematic racism, poverty, and lack of access to health care. So systematic racism, when I think about that, that's like a person getting an HIV test and being told that they don't have it on purpose. And then by the time they find out from the next doctor, it's full blown. And thank God I've never had HIV, but I have a fibroid. And so I made the mistake of going to the doctor in my neighborhood. Brownsville is not just horrible for a school system, but it's horrible for healthcare. The doctor dismissed me and said I was too young to have a fibroid. So I went outside the neighborhood. I went to downtown Brooklyn and I had an MRI and I found that out. So even though that's just a fibroid, imagine with HIV. If you go to the wrong doctor and the doctor's telling you, oh, you don't have anything, and then you could have HIV, God forbid, 10, 15 years, not know you had it, right? That's what I would consider systematic racism. Oh, and the doctor who told me I didn't have a fibroid was very much black. So my opinion, I feel like we do it to each other. And I said that in a previous video. We treat each other so bad. You cannot say the white man. You know, it's very horrible. So yeah, get tested regularly. Try to go outside your neighborhood. You know, some people experience racism in the nice areas, I guess, but I feel like always get a second opinion. That's if I can't say anything better, getting second and third opinions really does help with anything that's wrong with you, whether if it's a fibroid, God forbid, cancer, whatever. It's always good to get second and third opinions, right? Do your research on these doctors. Larissa from Flavor of Love, I don't know if y'all remember her. She's very informative, and I saw her YouTube video. She has a YouTube channel, and her name is Larissa, and she was talking about her fibroids, and she goes to the doctor in Beverly Hills where she was born, and she gave birth in the Beverly Hills Hospital. She was born in the Beverly Hills Hospital, and she said make sure your doctor has more than 1 degree, because OBGYNs, some of them do not specialize in fibroids. You would think them people was in school for 8 years and better, some of them longer, because you know everybody, people go through things in life and they can't just go to school straight through, or some people have to go to school part-time, so it takes them longer to get their degree. But make sure that these people have more than 1 degree and they specialize in fibroids, because not all OBGYNs specialize in that. So again, not just with fibroids, but God forbid if you have cancer, make sure that the person knows what they're talking about. Do research on the doctor. Thank God for Google. You can actually look these doctors up and see if they're good and legit. Yeah, it's very important. And yeah, so when they say systematic racism and lack of access to healthcare, I would go as far as to say knowledgeable healthcare physicians, because let's keep it real, a lot of these physicians don't know what they're talking about because they do not specialize in it. A lot of doctors, they do not specialize in HIV. They don't. So you need to find you a physician that specializes in that knows what they're talking about. That's a fact. Now the next topic is crack, the crack era. I wanted to speak about this because every family was affected. Me personally, in my family, people who don't live, people in my family that's not God-fearing, they don't live a very long life. They don't. And so what made me Christian is not just because God is always blessing me and keeping me and he answers my prayers, but to watch my family members die horrific deaths and the stories that I've heard. That's what made me draw closer to God, because I'm like, I don't want to die like that, you know. So for me personally, anybody that was on drugs in my family, they died very young. They started taking drugs, you know, if they started taking drugs at 20, by 30 they was dead. So, you know, you got some people who have crackheads in their family that live a very long time. You know, we all have them in our family as far as black people. I don't know any black person that says, oh, they just don't have nobody in their family. If somebody says that, they don't know. But any black American, they was affected by crack some way, somehow, because that's how devastating it was. Most of my friends were raised by a single parent and or a grandparent due to the crack era. The father started taking crack and then disappeared, or the mother started taking crack and the grandmother had to raise them. Nobody is raised by their grandmother for no reason. 9 times out of 10, especially if they are 80s baby, it's because the mother was on drugs, right? So the crack era is something that we can all relate to. You know, even if you don't know anybody in your family who took it, I'm sure if you ask somebody, a cousin, grandmother, something, they'll tell you somebody in the family was on it and they just don't want to say. But the crack era was just so devastating. so devastating because it affected everybody. There's not one person I know who didn't, like I said, if they didn't have a family member that was on drugs, it's probably because maybe their family was in the Caribbean during the 80s. That could be a possibility. But if your family was here in the 80s, somebody smoked crack, because that's how popular it was. So I wanted to explain it a little bit. I saw several documentaries, and the one that I want to talk about is, in the movies such as Scarface, they made it very attractive. When people, you have to understand, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, when you took drugs, it was not frowned upon. People didn't start looking down at people on drugs until the 2000s, when people were more educated. You have to understand that baby boomers and the generation before them, it was very cool to take drugs, right? We look down upon it now because we're more educated. Yeah, so you have to remember, it was very cool and acceptable to take drugs. As crazy as that may sound to me or any, just a millennial, this is the era that people were living in, because think about it, you had job loss from the 60s, from the 70s. So the CIA, and everybody says it was the CIA, and I believe it, because the crack era, guess who it affected the most? Black people. 80% of crack users between the 80s, like 82 and 89, were African American. Tell me that's not a coincidence, right? And like I said, we all know somebody who was on crack, or a distant cousin or relative, or me personally, I've heard stories, and those people passed away before I was born. I had another cousin, she passed away like in the 90s or whatever, and I remember seeing her, and she actually took me and my mother to Burger King. We bumped into her in the street, and I asked my mom, well, what happened to cousin so-and-so? She's no longer with us. She was on that stuff and never gave her life to Christ, and that's what happened. And it's just sad, because it's like, yo, when you see somebody and then they not here no more because of that could have been prevented. Like certain things like cancer, you can't really prevent, right? But then somebody on drugs, like, it's just sad. And there's so many people who passed away from it. There's so many people who died over it. So I'm gonna get right into the stats. Between 1984 and 1989, the homicide rate for black males aged 14 to 17 more than doubled in deaths. 18 to 24 increased nearly as much. And that's really sad, because a lot of people my age, they said that their fathers did pass away before they were born, or when their moms was pregnant and stuff. And I never really asked the detail. But according to the statistic, here you go, because of crack and black on black crime. So a lot of people started selling crack, and I'm gonna explain why. Growing up, I'm not gonna lie, I always felt like my friends that had their grandmothers raising them, I felt like, oh, their mothers was just lazy. I didn't really know the seriousness of drugs or understood it until as I got older and educating myself and watching documentaries. But for most of us that go through job loss, we find another job or get unemployment. Many of the stories I've heard, like the 80s was a horrible time, y'all. Like the 70s and the 80s, people lost their jobs and would go without a job for 5 years. That's how bad the economy was. It wasn't like, the recession when we went through it, 2009, 10 and 11, that was nothing. Like pretty much during that time, if you didn't have a job, you was being picky. Like me, I could truly say I was being picky. I had unemployment. But you got to picture the 70s and the 80s. You couldn't go on the internet to look for a job. You had to look in a newspaper. Obviously, the newspaper is going to have but so many jobs. So if you have 1 million people that's out of a job, somebody's not going to get a job, right? Whether as the internet is a way better resource to get a job, because I apply for at least 5 jobs a day. through the internet. You can't apply for 5 jobs a day and you walking on your foot, right? Car fare, first of all, and then the weather and different things. Like, you want to have an interview set up, and if you didn't have an interview set up, they would turn you away anyway, I could imagine. So imagine being in the 70s, getting laid off your job, the 80s. You can't get unemployment. A lot of people did not get unemployment for whatever reason. I guess that's the system that it was back then. No unemployment. You don't have no source of income. You could get welfare, but welfare not going to give you next to nothing. And year after year, no job, no income. The only thing you might have is food stamps, right? What does a person end up doing when they have no faith on top of that? You don't have any faith because you don't have no money. Let's keep it real. Like, you're not going to want to go to church because you don't have no money to put in the offering. You don't have any clothes to wear to church, right? So some of us might go to church because that's the way you raised. But just put yourself in these people's shoes, right? They have no way of supporting their families. Women too, because you had a lot of independent women. One particular woman, and my heart just went to the floor when she said this. She said, I had a nice apartment, I had nice furniture, I had children who listened and respected me. She was like, I was a nurse and I lost my job and I couldn't find no job. She said, I searched for a job year after year, and somebody introduced drugs to her and it went downhill from there. She lost her children. Her children went to her sister. Luckily, they didn't have to go in, and this is where the foster care system starts getting more popular. See? So it came from the CIA. George Bush and his wife going to talk about, had a campaign talking about say no to drugs. There actually was a scene where somebody dropped drugs at the White House. Everybody knew that was fake, but it was just so crazy how it affected the black neighborhood so harshly. And you know, it's true, they had a choice, they didn't have to take it, but some people don't have a choice. Not everyone is blessed. You know, God is a good God to me, but God blesses people differently. And you have people who, they literally, you know, things that we take for granted, like food. You have people who literally, they didn't know when the next meal was coming in. Can't get food stamps. Back then, I was, an older coworker had told me, she said back in the 80s, if your mother had a job, that was considered a miracle. That was like, you was rich in the hood. And she grew up in a, she was much older than me. She grew up in the 70s. And she said, yeah, back in the days, 70s and 80s, if your mother had a full-time gig or any type of job, the people in the hood was looking like, yeah, you got it going on. If you had new clothes to wear, if you had, I seen a documentary with a boy, he said he went to picture day and he had holes in his shoes. Like, people went through real poverty in the 80s, holes in their shoes, had to wear the same clothes for 5 years. Going shopping was a luxury, right? Going to the movies was a luxury for some families. Like, crack just was a relief for some people because it was a way to escape your reality, and it was a source of income for many people. So a lot of people, you can make $2,000 a month selling crack, and for a person that didn't have a job for 3 and 4 years, that doesn't sound too bad, you know. So a lot of people started selling drugs because there were no jobs, remember, and in the black area, while the white people were thriving and striving, a lot of black areas were not, you know. So I was thinking about, even with my own parents, my mom, she worked in a hospital. I think she was probably like a CNA or whatever, and she lost her job. And thank God my father, he got a job working for 911, And even though it wasn't paying much, it was something. They got married and boom. But it was very hard for my mom to to get a job. And thank God she got married, because if she didn't, and she's just one person, but imagine being a single woman and you can't find no job. And you have a family to feed. Now my mom didn't have me till after she was married. My parents got married in 84. I was born in 89. But you had women who they had children already and then they lost their job. Imagine what they turned to. Sad. Between 1982 and 85, the number of cocaine users increased by 1.6 million people. Just in 3 years, 1.6 million people. Also during this time, everybody got robbed. Like, if you have parents, if you have uncles, they will tell you the stories in the 80s. My parents, they didn't have much, but both of them got robbed at separate times. My dad said he got robbed in a parking lot. And after that, he makes sure he's, strapped or whatever. And my mom, I think it traumatized her because she doesn't like coming outside. My whole life, my mom always been a homebody. But she says she got robbed coming from church, and some guy took her pocketbook. She didn't have much in it but a Bible and $1, but it shook her up. And that's what the 80s was. I've heard stories of people getting robbed, especially in everywhere. Like, the way the hood is, it was like that all over the city. Not to mention the red light district, so you had the red light district, and then you had poverty, crackheads. I can only imagine what the 70s and 80s. The 70s and 80s had to be like the worst time ever, But powdered cocaine was a major cash crop for South American countries, especially Colombia. 80% of crack users were African American. I'm gonna read that again. It was a crop for South American countries. So it started in South America and then it came to the US, right? They said in what I read, the Caribbean countries started with it. They taught the teenagers how to break it down, and then it came to the US. So yes, you had Caribbean people that was using it, and then they brought it to the US, and 80% of crack users were African American. 80%. That's a very high percentage. Very sad. Very sad. Like I said, a lot of people that, if you're a millennial, a lot of people were raised by their grandmother, not because the mothers were lazy, but because the mothers were on crack. A lot of 80s babies was crack babies, and they turned out good nevertheless, but it devastated an entire race of people. Like I said, a lot of people, most black people I know, they have at least one family member that was on it. It affected everybody. I don't care who you are. If you were African American, Hispanic, it affected you some way, somehow. Even if you one of the lucky ones and nobody in your family was on it, somebody in your family got robbed from a crackhead, somebody tried to sell something because of crack, try to sell a TV. And a lot of comedies would make fun of drug users and stuff in the 90s, but it's really not funny. I remember moving here 13 years ago, and my son was like, he was 3, but when he was like 4, 5, 6 years old, he started growing up. He would ask me about the people in the neighborhood, and I would tell him they were zombies. I didn't want to tell him, oh, they crackheads, but poverty is a big issue. And when somebody cannot provide for their family and everybody around them is using it, I could say to God be the glory for myself, like, not just because of my faith, but I've never been around anybody on drugs. One person not cut him off. He actually he had his own business. But he didn't take crack, he popped mollies. So you have people who pop mollies. A lot of white people pop mollies, right? So, drug use is not just a problem. Crack use was a big issue in the African American community. But let's keep it real. Weed is a drug. Popping mollies is a drug. They're all drugs. They're just in different forms. And I wanted to make a disclaimer that if you know anybody on drugs, please tell them there's always a 1-800 number to call. You could Google and you could call 311 for different rehab centers. It's not cute. Eventually it's gonna catch up to you. So the final topic I wanted to talk about is COVID-19. So COVID-19, as we all know, it started in 2019 in other countries, and it came to America in 2020. I remember before it happened, the teachers were telling the kids to wash their hands, use Clorox, and we're not thinking anything serious. And then boom, the whole world shut down. A lot of people lost their jobs. For me, I did not want to be a part of that statistic. I had already went through unemployment prior and during the recession. So I was like, no. I went back to security and they laid off the sub-paras, of course, because they don't like us. And it was just funny because everybody was talking about budget. It was no budget issue. They laid us off because they wanted to. They didn't have to, but they did. And a lot of jobs took advantage of that. I had a homegirl from high school. She worked for BBQs and they laid her off and didn't even tell her. She actually went to work and she saw the long line of the customers, and that's when they told her, oh yeah, messed up. But lucky for her, I heard from a mutual friend, she got an apartment with her boyfriend. She works for Spectrum, so good for her. People started getting jobs. Like, I feel like with this recession, it wasn't as bad as the one before, because with this one, people got laid off, but they got jobs like 2 years later, which isn't bad, And COVID-19, they if you work for the DOE, they made you get the shot. If you wanted to, I was in college at the time, they was like, if you want to come in person, you gotta get the shot. And I wanted to be in class, like in person. And I was gonna stay online, but I was like, nah, some classes you need to do in person, So, yeah, they made us get the vaccine. I'll never forget, they said kids had to get it if they wanted to go to the movie theater. I brought my son to get it, and I do regret it because since the COVID-19 shot, he's always getting sick. He don't really get sick, but it's just weird, and we don't know how it's gonna affect us 10 years from now. We don't. We just did it because they said so. But when they said the movie theater and the dinners, right? 2 months later, they raised it. They said, oh, you don't have to get it no more. Because it was insane. Like, how you need a vaccination and sit down and eat dinner. It was so crazy. Like, and now people don't even go to the movies as much. A lot of movie theaters are shutting down. And it's crazy, so yeah. But 97.9 out of every 100,000 African Americans have died from COVID-19. African Americans were affected the most. Once again, something happens, a pandemic similar to the crack era, and who does it affect the most? Us. Now, some people may argue COVID-19 is because we was outside. The Jews was outside. Everybody was outside. This is a racially motivated situation, people. And I'm like, I needed to talk about this because it affected everybody. Some way, somehow. Everybody was in the house because everything was closed. The only thing that was open was the grocery stores. We all were working from home. If you was in college like myself, you had to do the stuff online. It was a very crazy time. I thought it was going to last forever. I really thought it was going to be on some apocalypse type. Like, it was just a crazy time. And then the fact that we're 5 years later and people act like it never happened, it's just amazing to me. Like, people were so mean-hearted. I had a former friend that I reached out to, and I reached out to her in 21, and she was just so nasty for no reason to me. And I'm like, nobody did nothing to you. But I said that to say this: COVID-19 was a scary time, but a lot of people just, they still wasn't getting how serious it was, you know. And yeah, so African Americans were 3 times more likely to require hospitalization after being infected, and twice as likely to die from the coronavirus than white Americans. Why is that? More black people tested positive for COVID-19. And I wanted to read the side effects for the COVID-19 vaccine. Is soreness at the, soreness, at the injection. So if you get it, I think everybody it happens to, they put it in your arm and it hurts. Fatigue. I definitely felt tired. Headache. I didn't have any headaches. Body aches and fever. Now, a few people have had fever. Some people have gotten sick, but COVID-19 was no accident, folks. And when I looked up COVID-19, something else is coming with bats, and they saying that it's infecting humans. Like, it don't stop. They always gonna look for different ways to destroy us. You know, slavery and police brutality wasn't enough. They had to come out with HIV cases, came out in the 80s and 90s. And at the same time of HIV came the crack era. At the same time. So you had people that was dying from crack and HIV. You had people that was catching HIV because women were selling their bodies for crack. So they was catching the HIV that way as well. I had a homeboy years ago. His mother passed away from HIV, and she used to take drugs. Hence why he ended up in foster care. And then I had another friend of mine. She, her grandmother raised her, and her mom, she has HIV. I don't know if she passed away. I haven't spoken to her. But yeah, so there's a lot of people I know who their mom, you know, was on that stuff. Recently, another friend of mine from high school, he was raised by his grandmother as well. And his mother recently passed away. She was on drugs, but she lived a long time. Some people do live a long time. So, you know, the problem is not just a Whitney and Bobby problem. It really affected a lot of people in the hood, in the inner city, that were poor. And it's unfortunate, you know. As far as COVID-19, people were catching COVID and they were home catching COVID. So it had nothing to do with going outside. When the Jews were going outside having weddings and bar mitzvahs and funerals, and Jews weren't catching COVID-19. And some people might say, oh, HIV is you promiscuous. No, everybody's not promiscuous. And you have people that are promiscuous that never caught an STD in their life. They have more partners than they could tell you, and they never caught any STD. So it has nothing to do with lifestyle, folks. If you sleep with somebody that's infected, that's that. The best protection, honestly, is abstinence. But even when you find your soulmate partner or whatever your faith is, religion, husband, whatever, that person could step out on you and give it to you. So either way, you know. But those are the 3 topics I wanted to talk about. And please comment, like, and subscribe. Your opinion. Are they trying to get rid of us as a race? I say yes. I never really thought about it, but yeah, they are. Because why is it that everything, we're number 1? We're number 1 for HIV. We're number 1 for COVID-19. 80% of crack users were black. What's up with that? Like, that's just... And I don't really know any white people. I just know, like, co-workers. I've never had any personal white friends. But the white people I do know, not one person was raised by their grandmother. Not one. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't know any poor white people. Every white person I work with comes from a middle class family. Whereas with black people, it's half and half. Some middle class, some lower class. Is it a setup? And what could we do as a people to stop being set up? Those are my thoughts.